I'm Carl King, and this is the Carl King Podcast, where every week we learn about music, filmmaking, and the other creative arts. To support this podcast, head over to patreon.com/Carl King and join for just $1 or $5 per month. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. Special thank you to my Illusionist $51 level patrons, both Hank Howard III and Chubode. Quick shout out to my music endorsements, Vienna Symphonic Library, Fractal Audio, Ernie Ball Strings, Toontrack, and Millennia Media. Now, let's get this episode beginned. This week's film review is White Noise from Netflix. My wife asked me if I wanted to watch an Adam Driver film on New Year's Eve. Well, I discovered that it was screenwritten and directed by Noah Baumbach, and I couldn't immediately place his name, but I recalled that he is a noteworthy filmmaker, so I said yes, let's watch that one. I was also not aware that this film is based on an acclaimed novel from 1985 written by Don DeLillo. And the film's story takes place in 1984, although it felt a bit more retro than that, in my own subjective opinion. My first observation was that this is the first new movie to ever look legitimately 70s, 80s film old. Like, I would have believed that those college shots with the long lenses were from the 70s. But that look mysteriously goes away pretty quickly, and it returns to a clean digital look. It made me wonder, were some scenes shot analog and some digital? 7 minutes in, during that family scene, I wondered, is this really good or really bad? I was thinking, man, what is with the stiff dialogue? Now, if this weren't a Noah Baumbach film, I would have shut it off. It was kind of like the experience of listening to Mr. Bungle's Disco Volante for the first time. Now, that scene is my idea of hell, being in a kitchen with 5 people all talking about different things at the same time. There's no continuity, no conversation. What is happening here, and what am I watching? Turns out that Adam Driver is the father of an overly intellectual family obsessed with encyclopedia-type trivia. So throughout the film, the adults speak in heavy philosophical abstractions, and the kids are constantly asking random scientific questions out of context. It reminded me a bit of the House of Yes, but times 100. Now, years ago, before I made Oracle of Outer Space, I had the intention to shoot a drama TV show. I wanted to combine beautiful, dramatic cinematography like that show Revenge, but with dialogue that made zero sense. And this film was very much like that. There were a lot of scenes where, if you simply turned off the sound and subtitles, it would have a heavily dramatic feel. But the dialogue is somewhere between awkward and totally surreal. The characters do not talk anywhere near how real people talk. There's this clunky formality, full of observations and unimportant details. Now, Adam Driver's character works at this postmodern institution called College on the Hill, where he and the other professors behave like cult leaders or televangelists. And instead of teaching, they give these performance art lectures in unexpected courses like car crashes and Elvis Presley and Hitler studies. And while he's at the school, Adam Driver even wears a sort of religious gown or cloak, which he flips around dramatically, and these blue-tinted 70s glasses that reminded me of cult leader Jim Jones. Now, part of the major action plot of the movie is a radiation cloud, or toxic airborne event. And so there is a panic and a mass evacuation. And then there's even a Naked Gun or airplane moment with all the trash cans at the end of the driveways. In any other film, this disaster would be the central premise. and the whole story would be based around that. But by Act 3, the cloud simply goes away, and everything sort of returns to normal. Now, this stretches the structure and rhythm of the story, because screenplays aren't expected to work that way. How often do you see a major physical threat or emergency plot point come and go like that, resolving before Act 3? Not often, and I can't think of another film that does that. And from then on, the plot becomes centered on an experimental medication that Adam Driver's wife, played by Greta Gerwig, has been taking. And it had been woven into the previous acts, but now it comes to the foreground. My favorite acting moment of all was when Greta Gerwig confesses an indiscretion, and Adam Driver imagines the grubby little motel room with the TV mounted near the ceiling, and he wanders around their bedroom, imagining the scene, and even looking around to try to see that ceiling-mounted television. In acting, there's a concept called object work or space work, and in that scene, the actors perform many minor physical actions as they deliver their lines, like changing rooms, opening windows, going through doors, standing up, sitting down, going in and out of the bathroom. Although some of those did make sense because the wife had just come home and was settling herself, kind of getting ready for bed, but the actions still weren't necessary. However, without those actions, the 14-minute scene would feel too static. So had the scene only been 2 to 3 minutes long, it wouldn't need all of that activity. And 100% by coincidence, White Noise was scored by Danny Elfman, who I'm going to talk about in the next segment. But I was so captivated by the surrealism of this film that I barely noticed the music. So I suppose that was a job well done. Anyway, I loved it. On the last possible day, White Noise made it into my top 5 films of 2022 at number 5. And I also gave it 5 out of 5 stars and a little heart on Letterboxd. And now let's move on to our analytical music theory analysis of the week. This week, our music theory analysis is The Simpsons Main Theme by Danny Elfman, requested by my Patreon member, Modiak. A little bit of historical perspective. This one is from the year 1989, which was a big year for Mr. Elfman, since it was also the year of Tim Burton's Batman. And it's surprising to note that he had only been in the film scoring business for 4 years at this point. That's right, his first real film score, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, happened in 1985. And about the production and sound quality, as far as I can tell, his orchestrator and bandmate Steve Bartek also officially got started at that time, even though he held a degree in music composition from UCLA since 1974, at least according to the internet. But it's pretty impressive that even though they had a ton of experience with rock music, by the time they did The Simpsons and Batman, they had really only worked with real film orchestras for 4 years. And maybe someday the world will hear that original Simpsons theme demo, which Elfman supposedly recorded immediately after his meeting with Matt Groening. And I did a search and didn't see it anywhere. But there is a collection called Danny Elfman and Tim Burton 25th Anniversary Music Box, and it contains a work tape of the Batman theme from this same time period, and it sounds pretty much like an old Casio keyboard. So I assume the original Simpsons theme from that same year was of that synthesizer quality too. And I'll put a link to the Batman demo in the show notes. That said, the orchestration on this Simpsons theme is a bit murky, but I think that was an intentional retro choice. It's a smaller studio sound and reminds me of Esquivel with its zany bongos and percussion, and of course it also has that cartoony Carl Stalling thing going on as well. And if you're not familiar with Esquivel, I will put a link to some of his music in the show notes. Now, let's talk some music theory. This piece is in the key of C Lydian dominant, which sounds like this. And that's also called the acoustic scale. Why? We don't know yet. Now, why do we use all these words for scales? Why learn all this music theory? Because music theory is the shared language of music. It's how we talk about it. It's like how veterinarians use the words cat or bird. One simple word like that can tell them about two totally different animals. If I call the vet and say, "I'm bringing you a cat," that tells them a lot of information with just that one word. They know what to prepare for. So to an educated musician, the words C Lydian dominant tells them many specific things about the music. And I don't know why so many people, especially musicians, are afraid to learn these things. So here's what Lydian dominant is. Here's the C major scale we all know. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C again at the top. And we all know that sound. It's the white keys on the piano. Now, when someone says Lydian or Lydian mode, we change one of the notes of that major scale. We take the fourth note of it, which is C, D, E, F, and we raise it by 1/2 step to F sharp. And that's it. So the C Lydian mode sounds like this. C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and C. So instead of the F natural, it's F sharp. And one of the common traits of Lydian is it's got that two major chords a whole step apart thing going on, like C major to D major, like this. Because in a plain old major key, those chords would be C major and D minor. And it's especially Lydian sounding if you keep that C underneath both chords. You can check out the first two chords of Inca Roads by Frank Zappa, and it's those exact two chords, C major and D major. Uplifting and otherworldly, and appropriate for a song about aliens. You'll also hear it all over the music of Steve Vai, John Williams, Frank Zappa, Rush, Devin Townsend, and of course, my own music. Guitarist Erin Hobson has a great YouTube video demonstrating a bunch of popular songs that use the Lydian mode, and I will put a link to that in the show notes. But Danny Elfman used yet another twist on this mode. He uses C Lydian dominant. Now, what does that mean? In this case, it means you also change the 7th note, or the B, and you drop it by 1/2 step to B flat. So the scale would now sound like this. C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B flat, and C. That's 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, flat 7, and 8. So all Lydian dominant means is a major scale with a raised 4th and a lowered 7th. And the main melody of this Simpsons theme uses those 7 notes. By the way, Danny Elfman also used this Lydian dominant scale in the opening of his Pee-wee's Big Adventure score. And that one is in F Lydian dominant, and there's a little arpeggio going up and down using the notes F, A, B, C, and E flat. And hey, to all the fans of Trey Spruance and Faith No More, Trey actually used the E Lydian dominant scale in the guitar solo for the song Last to Know on King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime. And oddly enough, it's superimposed on a blues riff with a minor third, which so far the scholars are unable to explain. Now, a special thing about both Lydian and Lydian dominant is that the sharp 4, or F sharp in the key of C, creates a tritone over the root, which can sound very evil and dark depending on the context. And it's funny how the same interval can trick our ear because it can either sound uplifting or satanic. Now, here's another cool thing about Lydian dominant. In that mode, you pretty much have 2 major chords, or at least 2 major third intervals, a tritone apart, like this. And this almost creates what is known as a Petrushka chord from the popular ballet by Stravinsky, which is 2 full major chords, a tritone apart, like this. And I use that exact bitonal sound regularly in my music. Technically, in Lydian dominant, the full triad built on the sharp 4 would actually be a diminished triad. F sharp, A, and C, using the scale degrees sharp 4, 6, and 1. So if you alternate between those two, it would sound like this. And notice that those actually have a common tone of C in them. But you could also build a augmented sounding triad using the scale degrees of sharp 4, flat 7, and 9, F sharp, B flat, and D. But the scale degrees and enharmonic names get a little confusing here because these scale degrees are all so close together. Anyway, it would sound like this. And now let's get even more abstract in music theory land. Here's what I think what makes both of these modes, or scales, both Lydian and Lydian dominant special. They move the major scale sound closer to a whole tone scale sound. If you notice, Lydian has 3 whole steps in a row. And Lydian dominant has 4 in a row if you start on the 7th and go up from there. Which is 1 note short of a whole tone scale. It's only missing an A flat. So I think ultimately, we're all just trying to play whole tone music. And maybe we should get it over with. Okay, but what is a whole tone scale? It is a 6-note scale made up entirely of whole steps like this. Now the fun thing about this scale is that there are only 2 whole note scales. So you can play C whole tone, and then move it up a half step to C sharp whole tone. But if you go up another half step to D whole tone, it's all the same enharmonic notes as C whole tone. So you can experiment with that yourself to understand why. Now, in my opinion, the whole tone scale has all of the best scale degrees. The 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, flat 6, and flat 7. Although that flat 7 is a tricky one because it can sound bluesy if you're not careful. And we all know that blues music cannot exist in outer space. And because of all these intervals in the whole tone scale, you can put a major third on top of every note, like this. Now, while you're at it, you could throw in a perfect 5th on top of each one, and no one would sue you. Because if you don't, you will just end up with all augmented chords. And speaking of whole tone, I'm pretty sure Danny Elfman used a bunch of 16th note whole tone runs in the woodwinds and strings like this. And and I will leave the up-to-tempo shredding to those of you whose fingers are in better shape than mine. Overall, this is a fun musical cue, and it probably made Danny Elfman an unbelievable amount of money, assuming he's paid every single time an episode of The Simpsons plays on TV. And I do have more to say about this music, specifically the phrasing of the melody, but I will save that for a part 2 someday. And thank you again to Modiak for requesting this one. Listeners, if there's a piece of music you want me to talk about on this show, send me a request, although priority will be given to my Patreon members. Okay, that's the end of this episode of the Carl King Podcast. Remember to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere else you listen to these dang podcasts. And support the creation of more episodes by joining my Patreon for $1 or $5 a month. That's patreon.com/Carl King. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. And as always, special thank you to my $51 a month patrons at the special illusionist level, both Chubode and Hank Howard III. And thank you to all of the very good friends of Carl King for listening. And as I always say, okay then, I will let everyone know.